Okay. Get started? And for those of you who are wondering why the hell they would invite a journalist to moderate this panel, I was involved in a little project called the Invading Sea. It was a big collaborative project with the Miami Herald and South Florida Sun Sentinel to raise awareness about the threat of sea level rise in South Florida. You know, won a few awards here and there, and probably more importantly, put me on the radar of the Volo Foundation, so they asked me to do this. And so that's kind of me, really in a nutshell. Been at this for a while in terms of journalism, about 37 years. Yes, I am a lot older than I look. But with that, I'll warn you, you know, and I didn't get a chance to warn Abby about this, but the fact that I'm a journalist, I'm used to kind of cutting through the BS and calling it when I hear it as well. So this could be fun.
Love it.
And
love it.
So let me go ahead and get started. I got my instructions here about how I'm supposed to be doing this thing, and gonna let everybody introduce themselves, say something for a couple of minutes, and then we'll just launch into questions. So we'll go ahead and start with Anna. Please introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rick. Hi, everyone.
And I'm timing you. 2 minutes.
Right, 2 minutes.
You're a politician, so I don't trust you.
Most people don't. It's true. We're rebuilding that trust every day.
Absolutely.
So it is great to be here. For folks who don't know me, my name is Representative Anna V. Eskamani. I am a proud Orlando native and working class daughter of immigrants from Iran. I'm actually a UCF grad, not once, but twice, so go Knights. And I'm getting my PhD right now over at the now downtown campus. So I love this college and everything that we do here, and I'm so excited that we're having this conversation here at the University of Central Florida. You know, why I come to this conversation, so obviously as a freshman Democrat, as a first-time policymaker, as a young person, issues around climate are critically important to us, and I actually do see some of our interns here from last session, and also Clay, who's a champion for these issues with ideas for us. So we've been, you know, as an activist on the ground doing this work, and then I like to tell folks all the time, you know, my evolution has been movement family work to now governance, and how do you find that happy medium between the two so that we are holding people accountable, we're pushing policymakers to make the right decisions, while also knowing that unfortunately there's always pushback that that policies don't work. It's not something we should pursue. And I tell folks all the time, especially with our 100% renewable energy bill, which we have refiled for this session, which would set the tone for Florida to be 100% renewable energy based by 2050. People have told me all the time it's too ambitious, and I tell them, you know, I didn't run for office to talk about what was impossible. I ran for office to fight for what is possible. And I'm looking forward to the conversation today to tackle these issues.
All right, thank you. Okay, now you got to clap for everybody. All right, Benji, you're next.
Well, hopefully what I say warrants a clap. I'm Benji Backer. I'm the president and founder of the American Conservation Coalition. I'm 21 years old, a current senior at the University of Washington in Seattle. So it's a little bit of a trek to get here, but I'm really happy to be here because I come at this from a unique perspective. I'm a conservative activist, and I have been since I was 10, that believes in climate change, believes that it needs to be tackled in a bipartisan way, and believes that the Republican Party and the conservative movement needs to have a much larger seat at the table if we're hoping to get anything done on climate change. I come at this also from a former climate denier perspective of the fact that when I was 10 years old, I became active in conservative politics, speaking on Tea Party tours, which I have much changed from that position over time. But I come at this from a perspective of knowing where some conservatives come from on these issues and how we can bring conservative folks to the table to get things done. And then obviously I come from the younger generation where we don't see politics on climate change. We just see climate change. And that is something that we all have to tackle and deal with. And regardless of political ideology, we care about this issue. So we are an organization with a presence on 180 college campuses nationwide. Just 10 days ago, I had the unique opportunity to testify with Greta Thunberg at Congress about these issues. really showcasing how this can be a bipartisan issue. And I was invited by the Republicans, which I don't think would have happened 5 or 10 years ago. I think we're moving in the right direction, but a lot more has to be done. I'm really excited to dive more into it. And before I kind of cede, I want to say that I'm also a huge Packers fan. I'm from Wisconsin, and I used to bring my Packers hat up on stage when I gave talks, but I did leave it in Alaska, which is about as far away from here as we can be. So I don't have that, but I'm a proud Wisconsinite and really happy to be here with you guys today.
Awesome.
And thank you for not bringing your cheesehead hat also.
I guess what I said did warrant a clap, so we're good there.
All right.
Hi,
Elisabeth.
everyone. Hi.
Please.
Sorry.
It's okay.
My name is Elisabeth Soto. I work for Climate Nexus, and our mission is to change the conversation about climate change from one that's argumentative to a constructive search for solutions. I also founded C4, Christians Concerned About Climate Change, whose mission is to promote awareness about climate change through prayer, discussion, and climate activism, especially given the fact that the Christian community is one that's often associated with denialism. My family, I'm originally from California. My mom's side is Mexican, my dad's side is Peruvian, both of which are regions that have been profoundly affected by climate change. And I'm very excited to be here with you all today.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. Solemi?
My name is Solemi Hernandez. I work for Citizens Climate Lobby. This is an organization that teaches people like you and me how to build relationship with their elected officials. We now have a legislation in Congress called H.R. 763 that put a price on carbon. This legislation is just on the House right now, and we have 66 co-sponsors. One of them Republican. I'm going to need your help, and we're going to need to talk. But it's moving forward, and it's a solution already in the Congress. And for what we have seen here, we know that we have all the solutions. The only problem is our government that is not acting on those solutions. So we need all of you to contact your members of Congress. And at one point, whenever I do my talk, I'm going to have everybody take their phones and write the members of Congress in support to this legislation. This legislation put a price on carbon, and the money goes back to the people to offset for those most vulnerable communities that are going to feel the increase on those products. And they will get a check in a monthly basis. Like I said, I got involved on all this because I have experienced climate change. I have 2 little kids too that are my motivation, and I don't want to leave. If it's so hard for us to live in this kind of world, we're suffering to so many diseases right now. I come from Naples. In my beaches, I can't even go to my beaches. There are dead fishes right now in my beaches. The only free stuff that I have to do with my kids, because there's not money enough to pay all the bills, they have taken it for me. So this is why I do this, because this is a personal thing. And the good thing about this is that this crisis is getting personal to all of us. And we have the opportunity to bring that awareness to each person you have a conversation with. So we're in exciting times, and we're creating a movement. This is a movement of human rights, because we all have the right to a clean and healthy environment. Thank you.
All right. Now, before I continue, I want to tell Abby I forgive you already for making a Florida Gator stand in front of this symbol here for like an hour. So let's go ahead and start, since we talked about bipartisanship a little bit. And Anna, you have reintroduced your
Correct.
legislation in the House
Correct.
again this year.
Yeah.
And
House Bill 97.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
which
All
would
right.
set a goalpost for Florida to be 100% renewable energy based by 2050, which half a dozen states in Florida have already, half a dozen cities in Florida have already committed to doing. So for us, it makes common sense.
So what do you see the House's role? What do you see the House's role here in pushing through this legislation and everything this year? What's going to be the difference this year versus last year?
It's a great question. Well, first, I love the diversity on this panel, right? You have folks with different cultural backgrounds, folks with different motivations to be here, a faith-based perspective, a conservative perspective, and that's what's going to take to move the needle on this issue. And actually, a few weeks ago, we hosted an interfaith town hall in District 47 that was a space for our faith leaders to share with us what are some of the big issues on their minds. And it was so insightful because what would you expect came up: housing, economic security, guns. But climate change came up for each one of our faith leaders as something that they're worried about. As worshipers of God and as those who take care of earth, they feel a sense of responsibility in that way. And then on the conservative front, I talk to my Republican colleagues all the time about the free market, which is something they love to brag about and wear on their sleeve. But the harsh reality in Florida is that there is no free market when it comes to energy utility companies. It is a monopoly. It is a highly regulated system that is maintained by something called the Public Service Commission. Every state has one of these. Ours is 5 appointees by the governor. They're often very pro-investor-owned utility companies. And so when it comes to setting the standard, whether it's the source of energy or energy efficiency, the PSC makes a decision, and the decision is grounded in our utility companies. And I'm talking about Duke Energy, Florida Power and Light, TECO Energy, Gulf Power, which FPL now owns, to give you the bigger picture. And so it's very challenging in legislature because though I do think the House and the Senate at a local level in your state is where major change can happen. Florida, of course, being one of the greatest for potential in solar. We are the Sunshine State after all. We're actually one of the lowest when it has that as a source of energy. Most of our energy in Florida comes from natural gas and coal. And so when we push this forward, we're always up against the money of utility companies who are major political donors. They donate to both parties. Our campaign, we took the Sunrise Movement No Fossil Fuel Pledge 2 years ago, and we took that pledge. We were already doing it before the pledge even became a thing. But I knew pretty firmly in my body that we were not going to take money from Big Sugar and not take money from investor and utility companies, so we can operate free of their influence. But unfortunately, many of my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans included, do not. And that's what we're up against. And so I do think it's that public attention. It's pushing the reality of climate change onto our colleagues. And I am hopeful because we did a press conference 2 weeks ago focused on our bill alongside Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez, who's in South Florida.
Right.
He is our Senate sponsor, and he's a champion for these issues. He wears water boots in the Capitol.
With something written on the side.
Yeah,
of
it
them
says
too.
action on climate. Yeah, his whole point is one day we'll all have to wear those, especially in South Florida. And so we had a press conference, and it was, very intersectional. We had folks of all backgrounds speak. We had the environmental justice perspective, and as one of our panels already spoke to, how, extreme weather impacts every person, but those with the less means are impacted the most. And we saw that in Puerto Rico with Hurricane Maria, in the Bahamas with Hurricane Dorian, and of course Hurricane Michael in the Panhandle. And so that voice was shared. We had subject matter experts in the academic world. Long story short, following this press conference, I actually received a text message from one of the incoming speakers. So right now in the Florida House, because the Republican Party is the majority, they decide their speakers like 3 terms in advance, okay? So this was the potential speaker for my class. Funny enough, I usually don't call him speaker because who knows if they'll still have the majority. But he is a leader in his party. And he actually texted me about my bill, asked us about our bill. And I told him we're working really hard to get Republican co-sponsors, and he said he's going to help.
Was this Chris Sprouse?
No.
Chris Sprouse you're talking
no,
about?
but Chris Sprouse,
But
to your point,
he
he did talk about it.
Yes, he did.
That same day of our press conference, it was very good kismet.
Yeah.
Speaker designee Chris Sprouse, who is the next in line, actually talked to his Republican caucus members about climate change and encouraged them not to be afraid of climate change. Now, unfortunately, it got a little muddy down because they made fun of the Green New Deal, which it seems like a preference is to sensationalize policies for whatever reason. But at the heart of his point, I was very hopeful. And during our press conference, we talked about that. And we did invite the governor's office. We invited our Commissioner of Agriculture to join us. We try to work in a bipartisan fashion in the sense of inviting everyone to the table and being open to those conversations. And I even invited FPL. I invited the utility companies because, we want to be really intentional in saying that we're not trying to shame anyone to take action, but we want to have a goalpost to move together in the right direction.
Okay, because what you're saying is representative of the fact that there is sort of this brand new effort in the state of Florida among Florida leaders to recognize climate change, and which was kind of a verboten term
For 8 years.
a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And so, but I wanted Benji to talk a little bit about, because one of the big obstacles has been bipartisanship.
Correct.
And in terms of moving this needle, what would you suggest, if you can, just kind of tell us what are you suggesting that conservatives, Republicans do, or what do progressives or Democrats do to bring them to the table? Because the table has been there for a long time. Nobody's keeping them from the table. So is there something that you suggest progressives could do to actually bring them to the table?
Yeah, I think it actually would help first by kind of talking a little bit about how we got to the problem of the political divide and the root of that. And I think both sides are at fault. So why I say that is, if you look at the 1980s, 1990s, and really any decade before that, the environment was a lot more bipartisan. You had the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the EPA. These were bipartisan things. Actually, a lot of them were led by Republicans and Ronald Reagan and others. So, I mean, it was bipartisan. But in the early 2000s, it started to shift. And there was a really interesting study done by Duke University in 2014 that showed that at that time, according to their study, 36% of Republicans believed in climate change. But when they were provided with a free market or market-based solution to climate change, it jumped to 70%. So the number almost doubled when they were given a solution that fit within their values. So the problem isn't believing in climate change or not. It's the fact that they think every solution to climate change has to be big government, which goes against what they believe in. Okay. So when we're looking at the issue, I think it's really important to know that. And then the divide, I think, happened from there. In my opinion, the left went, with more and more big government types of policies. And then as a result, the right, instead of proposing their own, just completely left the table. Right. And so that was a problem too. So I think both sides are at fault for that. So how can we change that? Well, I think it is starting to change. I think Florida is actually a really good example of that. So it's nice to hear about this on the state level. I work a lot on the national level, and you have so many Republican congressmen and women from the state of Florida who have started to act on this issue. We worked a lot with Carlos Curbelo and Ileana from South Florida before she retired. But then you have people like Brian Mast right now, who I believe is starting to do a lot more on this issue. Yeah. And so I think it's starting to change, because in Florida, people are seeing the effects of climate change firsthand, and it's becoming a more bipartisan thing. But the reason conservatives aren't a part of the discussion in the way that they can be is talking about the economic opportunities of climate change and how America can lead on this issue for the rest of the globe, as we've done so many times before on other issues. I think, both parties love America, but conservatives are always, the ones who are, rah, rah, America. They're making America great again, right? That's what they say. So, I mean, they want America to be on the forefront of leadership on issues. So if we can be on the forefront of climate change, that's a great thing. There's also the national defense angle. Almost every military leader in the United States agrees that climate change is a big threat, including Jim Mattis, who is Trump's, top guy. So there's a lot of different angles that you can use with conservatives. But also, I think the other last thing is that it has to be positive, because this fear-based movement that I think many have fallen into on the environmental side has turned away a lot of not just conservatives, but independents and even people who are moderate left. People like to avoid fear, and even though there are things that are worth fearing about climate change, human instinct is to avoid fear. People want to talk about positivity, opportunity, and there is positivity and opportunity when you're looking at this issue. There is an opportunity to make life better for everyone. There is an opportunity to create jobs. There is an opportunity for both sides to come together to solve climate change. Those are the types of approaches that we need to use on climate change, so that we're accepting and bringing in as many people to the conversation as possible.
Okay, all right, good. Elisabeth, if you could follow up a little bit on the faith angle, because I guess I may be like a lot of people where I really don't understand why that would have been an issue as a person of faith, because I am, and I never had an issue with it. So I'm just trying, can you give us a little bit of explanation of why there would have been a problem, and in terms of accepting that climate change is a real threat to our way of life?
Yeah, so I think, at least at C4, Christians Concerned About Climate Change, what we've seen is that one of the primary reasons why faith communities, especially more Protestant communities, refuse to engage in the issue of climate change is because it's seen as primarily a political one.
Okay.
That will divide followers, that will mean less membership, and we can go on a separate discussion about that. But that being said, one of the things that we try to remind pastors and the faith leaders that we work with is there was a time when slavery was also considered too much of a political issue to engage in, and if we don't want to make the same mistake, then we need to embody the sacrificial spirit that Martin Luther King talks about, which will enable us to engage on any issue that affects human beings, no matter what it is. And if we don't, we will become an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century or the 21st century.
Well, do pastors, preachers, whatever their title may be in the pulpit, do they need to be encouraged to talk about this in Sunday services or in Bible study or what have you? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's right. And I think, just jumping ahead to one of the questions that I saw here, which was, what can people do to become activists on climate? If there is a sphere in your life or a community that you're a part of that is not engaging on this issue, that is not talking about climate change, you can help to fill that void.
Yeah.
And so that being said, I think that, the reason why C4 was born was because I got so frustrated that I started this organization. But we've seen a multiplying effect. Now I'm not the only one talking to pastors. Our members are talking to pastors. We're reaching out to them. We're, engaging in weekly prayers for these people that they will rise up as the leaders that they were meant to be, and really talk about things that are relevant, because I think that's what we want to hear.
And I think it needs to be said here too, for the sake of diversity, that
Yes.
conservatives run across every religion.
That's right.
It isn't just Christians. They're Muslim, they're Jewish as well. So I think those leaders probably deal with some of the same thing in terms of having to convince their followers. One of the things that I'm kind of curious about is sort of a backdrop here, and some people have mentioned this earlier today, is that we run the danger in terms of being in like this giant echo chamber, with climate change. We've all been talking about this for a while, and I'll give you my experience with this when we were creating the Invading Sea project. And Solemi, I want you to chime in. One of the things we did was we did a lot of research to find out about sea level rise, the threat of it, whether it was real, and so on. And then we find out about this Southeast Florida Climate Compact, which had been around like 9 years, and actually is an incredibly innovative thing if you guys have never heard of it. What they are doing with Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe counties is being repeated all over the place now, because because everyone else now realizes the value of collaboration. But one of the things I ended up asking after we first interviewed them was, why the hell hadn't anybody heard of you guys? You've been out here working on this for 9 years. And here I am, I've been writing about sea level rise as an editorial writer and everything for 5 years. I have never even heard of you. This is where I'm talking about in terms of getting caught up in our own echo chamber. And I believe Dr. Shepard was the first one that said that we need to start talking to people outside of this room. So can you talk about that a little bit, and how do we move to that? Because everybody in here has drank the Kool-Aid, And so how do you move it outside of a group like this and start getting the everyday people
You go
really
and-
involved in climate activism?
Well, you go and meet your community. You go and see what your community are doing. You cannot jump and say, hey, I have the solution for you, or I want you to volunteer for me. It's not the way it works. You have to build a relationship. Go help out your community. See what your local issues are in the community. Connect with local universities and start giving lectures. There's a lot of education that is needed. The same thing happened with Citizens Climate Lobby. People don't know we have this legislation in Congress. We also have a climate solution caucus in the House, and there's going to be another one. It's a bipartisan one with 43 Democrats and 23 Republicans. They don't necessarily support the legislation, but they are having conversations about climate change. And they're going to introduce another one on the Senate.
Right.
So it's pretty much, we now, this is going to be a campaign that we have to use this momentum that is taking off with all this march across the world and start educating people. Universities are a great point of communication. Go to your communities, go everywhere, table everywhere. It's not going to take 1, 2, 3 times. It's not going to take 6 months, 5 months. It's going to take a long time, but this is the beginning of a movement, and that's how we do it.
Okay, and I was going to ask you, Anna, the same thing. I mean, you're trying to move this legislation along.
Yeah.
You know, everybody in here probably agrees it's good legislation. How do you get the support that you need, you know, to move this forward, even if it has to change somewhere in the legislative process? How do you get it moved in a committee, or even get it heard in a committee?
Get a hearing. Yeah, absolutely. It's our
Get a
second
hearing,
year.
yes.
Our second year filing it with no hearing so far. So, real quick, to that question. I mean, it is around coalition building, and Benji already mentioned some of the economic points. I want to elevate that a little bit more. So we know that if we don't act on climate, we're going to see sea levels continue to rise. We also have public health crises, right? And that's not just with sea levels and extreme weather, it's also air quality. Because the more we rely on fossil fuels, the more our young people and our seniors are going to suffer in that way. And then that also is a cost on the public, because when folks who without means get sick, they will go to the hospital and be a cost to taxpayers if they don't have preventive care or are unhealthy in the first place. And then this economic piece on a larger scale, real estate is now being impacted by rising sea levels, especially along Florida's coastways. And Moody's Financial, one of the world's largest assessors of credit, purchased a research firm on climate resiliency and will be integrating that into their formula for borrowers, for any municipal borrowers, when adjusting and assessing their credit and their ability to borrow. So we bring these arguments and facts with us everywhere we go. And depending on the person we're talking to, you'll emphasize the points that might resonate more with the individual than others. I do think that many Republican colleagues are getting comfortable talking about climate change because the public has moved and left them behind. I think that is part of it, especially in Florida, when folks of every economic class are impacted. I mean, folks of money who live on the coast. In Naples is a great example. Naples is one of the is one of the worst counties in the country for economic disparities. You have Immokalee, our farm workers who are working in the sun, very poor wages, and then you have along the coast incredible homes. Governor Rick Scott is from Naples. And so you see this huge disparity in income, and that's a situation where both folks of means and folks without means can find common ground. And then
Rick
one thing
Scott
I'll
might
say,
be a tough sell.
LOL,
So you
true.
might go
Well,
there.
he was recently bragging about, being an environmentalist. I mean, he lied to. I mean, I won't get too political here, but but he wants to act like he is, right?
Yeah.
Like he realizes it's politically dangerous if he's not.
Yes. Yes.
But the
To
one
engage,
thing
yes.
to your point about folks here, like being subscribing to this work, I definitely encourage each one of you, especially if you're from Florida, like call your lawmakers and ask them to co-sponsor our bill. And when I say lawmakers, I don't mean Congress. I mean your state lawmakers. Everyone in this room, you have a state senator, you have a state house rep. Call them, ask them to co-sponsor this bill. Contact our office. We'll give you more steps on who else you can call. But I also think it's up to everyday people to understand that it's not just the national debate, it also is local. And you can have even more impact locally, especially with your cities and counties. So City of Orlando has made the commitment on 100% renewable energy. Orange County has not, right? So here's a local campaign. This university, UCF, can make a commitment to be 100% renewable by a certain date. Like, why the hell not? So we have a lot of opportunities for students to get involved, and the state's going to be 100% renewable. All the public agencies will be the ones that start, and universities count in that.
Okay. Well, let me push out a number here that, and I want Benji to chime in on this one. So, when we were talking about creating our newsletter to go with the Invading C, our digital social media guy came back and said there was a community of more than 1 million on Facebook who wanted to engage about climate change. Wow. More than in the state of Florida, not nationally. In the state of Florida, more than 1 million Facebook users said that they were interested in climate change. And so that's when I talk about going outside of our circle. And Benji, and I imagine a lot of those are Republicans and conservatives as well, because they want to know what's going on. So how would you suggest that we move forward in engaging all of those people who probably are not, not aware of all this good work that the Volo Foundation and others are doing? How do we engage those people?
Yeah, I really do think, going into the communities, like you said earlier, is good, but also coalition building with groups that you might not associate right away. So, for example, right outside this building, I was walking in, and some UCF college Republicans recognized me, and they came up and they wanted to talk, and it was amazing. First of all, they didn't know this was going on, but they also, before they heard about our organization, they didn't know that they could talk about climate change, and all 4 of them are sitting out there, true believers in climate change. They want to do something about it, and we've kind of left them in the dust in a way. And they don't really feel like they know how to talk about it. Another really great example of this is I went to a meeting of high-profile environmental CEOs last summer, and I was sitting at the same table with like the CEO of the Sierra Club, who has become a good friend of mine, and some other groups. And a lady came up to me, and I can't remember which organization she represented, but she said, "You are the first conservative I've ever talked to, ever." And I mean ever, which it sounds like it's unreal, but I actually it took me a while to register that. I was like, how is that possible? We have to get out of our echo chamber, because I was also the only conservative in that entire room of 60 people. So I understand that conservatives and different groups have not been a part of the discussion, but we've got to be. And there's other communities. It's the Christian community. It's the farming community. A study came out yesterday that showed that the vast majority of farmers want to do something on climate change, but they feel left behind by President Trump. They feel left behind by the Republican Party, and actually, they felt more left behind on climate change by the Democratic Party than any of those 3. So there's that group. There's also just, for example, I was speaking in Alaska. Alaska arguably probably sees climate change more than here, which is saying a lot.
Yeah.
They feel super left behind, and they want to do stuff on climate. We have to include these groups and build a coalition outside of our own, because otherwise nothing is going to get done, and that is why we haven't been able to get things done. But I think, again, that's starting to shift to allow your legislation to have hope. But it has hope because now we can actually talk to Republicans about it. But it's not just Republicans. It's all these different communities that have been left out. And the last thing I would say to that is, when I testified before Congress, and I was talking to a couple people about this earlier, the echo chamber was very obvious afterwards, because Al Gore, Hillary Clinton, the committee, the Climate Crisis Committee, and 2 of the members of Congress who actually asked me questions all cropped me out of the social media posts. They tagged the other 3 witnesses and not me. And they actually posted pictures of the 3 witnesses with it cut off right before my face. That's a problem. Yeah. And that's the problem with that's the problem with keeping out voices who might disagree a little bit on terms of policy, but we agree with the severity of the problem and we want to be a part of the discussion. We've got to be at the table.
Okay. Elisabeth, to go back to one of the questions on here, what has been the most effective message for you in terms of engaging people of faith, in this discussion?
Oh, people of faith. Well, I kind of have 2 responses.
It's fine, go ahead.
Basically, so my work with Climate Nexus. Climate Nexus is actually, it's like a PR, climate change communications nonprofit.
Okay.
So we function the way a PR or communications firm would. But instead of servicing paid clients, we service other nonprofit organizations, some of which are faith and some of which aren't.
Okay.
But I think that the answer to your question, has to do with both what we've seen through C4 as well as what we've seen with message testing through Climate Nexus. So what we have found at Climate Nexus through our digital testing is that there's no real one-size-fits-all message. It's actually our job to find out what language and ways of communicating are most effective with certain audiences and why. And that actually the message doesn't matter as much as the person delivering the message. So if it's a person that you can identify with, that represents your values, that you feel as a trusted source, you're much more likely to actually hear what they have to say.
Okay.
And then, I think this is true through our work at C4. You can talk about the data and science all you want, but that message needs to have a moral authority behind it. And oftentimes that's going to resonate a lot more than just spitting out facts. If I say, this is an issue, this is one of the greatest humanitarian crises of our time, and if we're committed to the well-being of human beings, we need to commit to whatever is affecting them. That's a much more powerful, argument than whatever else, other stat you might want to throw at somebody.
Okay, I got it. So let me go ahead, please.
I think we have forgot something that everybody can do, and we have mentioned here many times. Get on Facebook and share it in other groups. Share all this conference, share it with the news, share activities, share initiative. Facebook and social media and media itself is a powerful tool. And you're going to get a lot of back pushing, a lot of maybe insults, but it's okay. I mean, the information is getting out there. That's how the information about the water crisis got out there, through social media. That's a powerful tool, and that's something that everybody of us can do.
Okay.
And I really just want to emphasize the private sector in this that can be really problematic. I mean, obviously you want, it's so ironic, right? Especially listening to Benji's points around, where Republicans engage in the conversation, because we don't have a free market in Florida. Just speaking to our state, other states are all different, but it's very frustrating for me as a Democrat that wants a free market, that wants competition, wants our solar installers to have a fair shot at competing with everyone else, and we can't, because it's a highly regulated system that Republicans consent to, as do Democrats, but Republicans have been in control for our state for about 20 years, so they really are currently the ones who can make the decision if they want to change it, right? So I'm curious if my panelists have any conversations about, the role of political contributions by investor-owned utility companies, and especially for Benji as a Republican, how do you see that contrasting with your points? Because at the end of the day, it's we can agree on values, but you can't eliminate the politics of it, and the fact that Republicans and Democrats take a lot of money from these groups, and that even some of our smaller utilities get gobbled up by the bigger ones. So how do, what are you seeing in other states? How can we combat that? And what's the argument to Republicans who are so scared of questioning the status quo because they don't want money spent against them in their next election?
That is a really good question. And actually, we were very active with the Audubon Society in South Carolina on the Energy Freedom Act, which deregulated their energy industry. Because a true conservative, I mean, they claim we claim to be free market, but it's so hypocritical to claim that and then support a regulated energy market.
Well,
that
I would
picks
love
winners
for you
and
to
losers.
come to Tallahassee and tell my colleagues that.
I'm happy to, but
that would be great.
But the problem is actually with the education. Because most conservative voters don't know that that's the case. They, don't know that their energy market is incredibly regulated and that it actually probably means they're paying more than they need to be. And so both of those different aspects need to get in the conservative voters' minds, because they need to pressure lawmakers, wait a second, you're saying you're free market? No, you're not. You're supporting this. That's the opposite of free market. I want a free market. on the energy. That's what we have to have conservative voters reaching out to their leadership saying, and we don't because they don't know about it. Like my grandparents, my parents, who are diehard conservatives, they would never know that if I didn't tell them, you know? And I think that's the biggest problem there.
And to that point too, real quick, the misinformation campaigns that utility companies then pay for, right? I mean, right now in Florida, we do have an effort to have a deregulation amendment on the Florida ballot.
Right.
And there's a lot of mixed feedback with environmental groups actually opposing it, interestingly enough. And so it also hits the point of just a long history of fossil fuel companies paying propaganda to also, own the narrative and push it in one direction. And so I do think the knowledge gap is a big deal for us on all sides.
Okay. So we're going to have a little fun here. Because I want to know what role the media should be playing in this. One of the reasons for our project was the fact that our news side, we didn't believe was doing enough. Okay, but now, as you've seen, leading up to the Climate Action Summit at the UN a couple of weeks ago, 170 media organizations around the world actually started working on this and to raise awareness about climate change. Kind of late, I will say, kind of late, but it was good to see.
Yeah.
And I criticized them as much as anybody else. And if you want to be mean to us, that's fine. I got thick skin. I have to take it every day. But what do you see the media's role being going forward? I want to start with Elisabeth on this. What do you see the media's role? First of all, has it been enough? And then where do you see it going from here?
Well, I think, if I didn't make it clear before, Climate Nexus kind of aims to fill that void. So when you saw recent coverage of Hurricane Dorian, Imelda, there were plenty of news outlets that made the connection between those events and climate change, and many of them that didn't. So one of the things that we try to do is actually provide journalists with the science behind whatever topics they're covering, and whatever we're giving them information on, in ways that they can communicate that easily to the general public. So I think that the media does have a very important role to play, and we have seen an increase in climate change coverage in general. And since we're talking about activism, I think one of the reasons for that are the climate activists themselves that are at the helm of this movement. I mean, you saw, I think Axios reported 18 million social shares of climate stories in the last 2 weeks,
that sounds
which
about
is
right.
more than we've seen in this entire year.
And it's still trending, by the way.
And it's still trending, right. And so while it certainly hasn't been enough, I think it's increasing and it's improving, and I hope that it continues on that trajectory because they're, in contrast, like, I don't know if any of you are aware, but the amount that, the current administration is spending on Facebook ads is something like 19 million. So we need to find organic, earned media ways to kind of combat that.
Yeah, okay. Solemi?
The media have a super important role. You guys are the one that brings awareness to the situation and basically, communicate the like your legislation. I worked on your legislation last year. I remember now where I know you from. And things like that, my legislation, initiatives that are going on.
You're talking about the carbon tax?
Her legislation for 100%. I worked last year on that.
Okay, well, I'm talking about yours. Yours in the federal one.
Mine is on the federal level, yes.
Yeah, that's the one that Ted Deutsch is one of the primary sponsors
Ted
of?
Deutsch and Francis Rooney.
Right, okay.
That's great.
And
We're
before
both
it
from
was
Florida,
Carlos.
by the way.
Yeah, bipartisan.
Yeah, one Republican and one Democrat.
And it's market-based, the market is the one. If you want to talk about market-based and free market, this legislation is. But bring those initiatives to the public. Media plays an important role in this because people are reading the news, people are watching TV, they're watching YouTube, and get to the communication. What is going on? What really happened in Dorian? What really happened in our communities? Bring the story forward, the stories that haven't been brought forward, and bring also the solutions that people can get informed because social media, and all the media outlets play an important role for this movement to be successful.
How does your legislation, which didn't get a whole lot of pub last year, how do you get that out in front of folks better this time.
Yeah, it's
and
a
get
combination
more of my
of things.
colleagues back paying attention.
It's a combination of things, Rick. So first, I think there is a knowledge gap within the media on just energy policy, because it is complicated. Samantha Gross is a great reporter now at the Miami Herald. She was Tampa Bay Times, and she's been writing about energy a lot recently. And I know, too, that the major newspapers in the state of Florida have combined forces to talk about climate change and to share resources, which I think is such an important step to take to not be competitive on this issue as journalists, but to work together and build off one another's knowledge and expertise, because we desperately need it. I think one reason why, to echo Benji's points around the public doesn't hold people accountable and lawmakers get away with this, is that there is no public outcry. There is no media story about the amount of money our Democrats are taking from fossil fuel companies. And there was not much media, for example, around a utility-backed bill last session for undergrounding that was branded as resilience, but was really about utility companies having more money because they make money off capital investment. And I think only 3 Democrats in the entire legislature voted against that bill. Myself included. So I think that there can be a lot of intentional efforts to, have more collaboration among our major papers to share expertise. And then as a lawmaker, it's definitely up to us to share, find unique perspectives. I penned an op-ed right after Hurricane Dorian happened, calling out climate
I never saw
change.
that op-ed.
It was in the Sun Sentinel, but yeah. I wrote it for the Orlando Sentinel, but I think they're all they share resources. So,
quite all
yeah,
right.
it was in the Sun Sentinel. My grandparents saw it in Fort Lauderdale.
No, my point. No. My point was
Yeah.
that Dorian was 60 miles off of my county's coast.
Correct.
So that would have run well in my newspaper.
Totally.
If I had known
So
about
we
it.
got great feedback. And that's
Okay.
something else too. It's so funny when the Bahamas was so terribly impacted, right? I mean, and we keep seeing these storms come again, destroy communities, destroy livelihood. Kind of reminded me of like the risk of being political when gun violence happens. Remember, when we kept seeing all these mass shootings and then just thoughts and prayers, people were nervous to say we need gun control, and I feel like now people aren't nervous to say it anymore. People just say it every time there's another mass shooting. I feel like climate change with the disasters that's happening was almost like that same evolution. Like I almost felt a little hesitant to like automatically go to climate change because people are directly impacted, and there is still debate around the science and the connections, but overwhelmingly most scientists are saying that yes, we always have storms, but they're becoming more frequent and more extreme. And so I took that step to pen an op-ed that focused on how we can prevent these disasters by addressing climate change. But I feel like even that was almost like politically risky. Like we're moving the direction where we're more comfortable calling things out, but I don't know if every person feels that yet, including my Republican colleagues. So I think the more aggressive we are in sharing stories, in sharing perspectives, creating our own narrative, like Greta is such a perfect example. This young person just has created her own narrative. And then the media follow her and then tell more stories because of her. Yeah. So I do think it's up to us as individuals, folks on this panel, folks in this room, to tell your story, to write those op-eds, write letters to the editor, blog about it, tweet about it. We have to keep the story alive and throw your weight behind policies that you feel reflect the issues that you want to address.
Okay. Oh,
Can I
okay.
say one
I had
thing?
one. Okay, go ahead.
So I actually think the media is one of our biggest uphill battles as an organization, as conservative, climate change, environmentalists. And the reason that is like, if you look at the testimony, and I hate to go back to that for the third time here, but if you look at the testimony, also CNN and MSNBC talked about the other 3 panelists, but didn't talk about me. And I think it could have been a really good way to talk about how bipartisan voices were coming together to talk about climate change from a young perspective. You had Republican members of Congress, Democratic members of Congress, and you had 4 young people under the age of 21, or at the age of 21 or under, who believed in climate change, and it spanned across the political spectrum. Because I was, the conservative, there was an LGBTQ perspective, there was a Seattle, Washington, pretty far left person, and then there was Greta. I mean, that's a pretty unique story to tell, but that wasn't told. And then Fox News doesn't have a peep about it. And they have somebody from ClimateDepot.com, which is a climate denial site, on every single day. So, we don't get the time of day on the Fox Newses of the world or the, the left-leaning
MSNBCs of the
media.
world.
And so the point is, I think people want to be told uplifting stories. Like, I think everyone in this audience would want to hear about uplifting stories about how people are changing the world on climate change and things that are getting better and things that need to get better.
Right.
But we don't hear that.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
a good point. A really good a local media
Hold on,
group.
let me get another
So
question
like
in here.
Next City,
Let me-
check it out. They do city-focused stories that are more positive.
Who did
Next
you say?
City.
Next.
Next City, they're based out of Philadelphia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so let me ask this because it struck me earlier, and I don't know if everybody else remembers this too, when the young lady got up, I think she was a high school student, and asked about what could she do to get involved. And I was like, I don't know about you guys, but I was flabbergasted. I was like, you got to be kidding me, man. And it kind of hurt a little bit because that she did not know how to, how to do this with all of these available resources that she hadn't already known that. So, and that brings me to activism here. So what I'd like to hear to finish up here, I'd like to hear what each of you guys would really just tell this young woman in terms of what she should do to get active, in this, okay? And as though you're responding to her question, what can I do? Who do I call? What can I do first? What can I do next month? What can I do a year from now? It doesn't matter, okay? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So that's, first of
wrap it
all, amazing, and I'm so proud that you want to get involved, and we're here to help. So I encourage you to send us a direct message or email us or call our office. We can connect you to local organizations who are doing this work, and whether it's some of the groups you see up here or Sunrise Movement, Sierra Club. There's so many groups that need you. Our office also has high school internship opportunities, so we're available to you as well. But I would definitely encourage you to just give us a call, and we'll get you plugged into groups that really will value you, and you'll be able to grow as a leader.
Okay, cool. Benji?
Yeah, it really shouldn't. It shouldn't be as complicated as it is because the amount of times that I get asked that too, it's like, wait, it should be obvious how you can make a difference if you care about it and you're watching the news and everything. And I do think high schoolers and college students play a really, really important role in this fight. And I would say that there are three kind of key ways that I would talk to really any high school or college student or any young person about getting active. There's first is the personal side of being active in it, and that's lowering your carbon footprint and waste footprint on the earth and leading by example. Like when I flew here and I'm gonna fly back tomorrow, I'm gonna buy carbon credits to offset my flight to here. You have to lead by example if you're gonna talk about it. The second is education. So you have to educate others on why they should care, what they should care about, what the problems are, and come at it from a perspective that they're going to be, attracted to, but also informed by. And so that could be creating an organization, locally, state, whatever, to do that, or it could just be talking with your friends. And then the third part is advocacy, and that is, calling on your university or your high school or a company or the city government or the national government or anybody to start making changes. And you could, again, do that by starting an organization locally, or you could just do that by having your friends and family do it. It doesn't really matter. But all three of those, personal actions, education, and advocacy, are the path to solving this problem, and those are the easiest ways to get involved, and literally anyone can do it.
All right, Elisabeth.
Yeah, I would echo what was said. I think being an example really matters, especially if you're looking to become a leader in the space, and acting individually as well as on a wider level is important. I actually left the financial services industry, and my salary was cut in half when I decided to go into the climate change space, and I think that I would tell this person, don't be afraid to make sacrifices and know that it can be a lonely place in the beginning. But there are places to get plugged in, especially locally. I mean, we're based in New York City, and we saw on a local level some of the most comprehensive climate change legislation passed by a group called New York Renews. So, to Anna's point, get plugged in with those local organizations because they can make a huge difference. Walk the walk in your own individual life. And there was another point, but I forgot what it was. So maybe it'll come back to me.
Okay, so let me.
So I'm going to tell what I told the young lady. I'm going to make everybody of you take your phones out. You're going to write your member of Congress in support to the legislation, HR 763. So I'll wait for you to take your phones out.
HR 760. We don't have time to wait.
Okay, you're gonna type cclusa.org /Bright. WRITE.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So you're gonna fall in this website. You're gonna put your email, your address, and you get an option to sign into our website where we have a lot of resources, educational resources, what you can do, how to write an op-ed, how to get involved, grassroots, media outreach, everything at your disposition and to your computer. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Solemi.
I remembered my last point. It was radicalize your parents on climate change. Talk to them because that's really important. To talk to her parents about climate change.
That's an excellent point. Excellent
Not
point.
enough people are talking to their parents. And also, if you have Chase Bank or any of those major banks, they invest in pipelines. I worked in this area. Just cancel them. Go to a different bank. Aspiration's really good.
All right. So I've been told to wrap it up because I screwed up and didn't take questions from the audience. And so thank you to the panel. Great job. Great job. And thank you to you. Thank you for sitting in.
Meeting you.
And you're welcome to come and ask them questions afterwards, right? Everybody's available to ask questions. Okay. Oh, sorry. Some house cleaning.
Yeah, great. All right, yes, thank you again to our panel. Wonderful to have you here. If you have some questions for this panel in particular, you can write to Volo Foundation. It's volo@volofoundation.org, and you can just put in the subject line the panel title, Activate Your Activism, and we're happy to take those questions and either ask our panel or we'll also get back to you.
Okay. Get started?